Welcome to Obsessive Art. In this video we will cover the basics of Blender. Before we begin, check out our handy hotkey document, and if you need personalised assistance we offer one-on-one consulting services. To save a file in Blender you can go to File and click Save. You also have Save As to save and name the file. You can save a copy, or you can save incremental, which will take a file with the name Blender01 and change it to Blender02. You can also use these hotkeys here to quickly save, Control S being the one that you want to use quickly while working on your project. To open a project you can come into File and you've got Open and Open Recent. Open Recent's really useful if it's a project that you're in the middle of, but if your file doesn't come up in your Open Recent, you just go to Open and browse for your project. To import a file, you go File, Import, FBX, and find the file that you just exported, and you will bring in what you had selected. If you don't select your object and then export with selected objects only, you'll end up bringing in everything. If you do not export as selected objects, you'll end up bringing in everything that was in your file as a second copy, or whenever you take it to a different piece of software it will have every object that was in your Blender file. So always make sure to use selected objects unless you specifically want the whole scene to be exported. In Blender there is various ways to control the camera. The main one being holding in your middle mouse button will allow you to rotate the camera around the focus point. Holding shift and middle mouse button will allow you to pan the camera. If you hold Alt while using your mouse button, you will snap into orthographic view as you scroll. It's best not to hold Alt as it can be quite hard to control. It's best to move your camera close to the position that you would like to go into orthographic mode and then hold Alt, and you'll see it snap into place a lot more accurately. There's various other ways, such as using your numpad to snap into the different views, and you also have this gizmo here, which will allow you to snap and control the camera without using your middle mouse button. This is good if you're using a trackpad. There is also a menu if you press the tilde key, which is the one above tab, which will allow you to snap into all of these views. If you ever lose the object that you're working on, you can move the camera away. You can select it up here if you don't have it selected, or if you already have it selected, that's fine. You can hold in your tilde key and go to View Selected, and it will take you back to your object with it centered into your view. In Blender, the fastest way to move an object is once you have it selected, hit G for grab. This will grab the object relative to your cursor. Like the movement of a cube, instead of hitting G, you can hit R, and it will allow you to rotate an object, and you can also use the axes as well to control the rotation of that object. So if you only want to rotate it on the Z axis, you can hit Z, same with X, same with Y, and the same as before as well. If you hit R and then Shift Z, it will allow you to rotate it in just the two. Typically you won't use this with rotate though. It's the same for scale. Scale something up, you can scale it in the Z, you can scale it in the X, and you can scale it. In 3D software you have two view types. You have perspective view, which is similar to real life, where if something's further away it looks smaller than something that is closer. You also have orthographic view, which means if two things are the same size, no matter the distance apart, they will always cover each other perfectly. Just like here, how this cube looks the exact same size, it lines up in this grid. This is closer to what you would see in like 2D CAD or like just typical CAD drawings, blueprints. You're going to spend most of your time in perspective view, but orthographic view has its uses, such as accurately moving things into position based off of a reference image. In Blender you have two main modes. You have object mode and edit mode. Object mode is typically how you start in a Blender file, and it allows you to edit the various objects in your scene, such as like if you have multiple different objects, it keeps them separate. You can change their transforms, but you can't edit the actual geometry of them. If you want to go in, edit the actual geometry of a shape, you can then go into edit mode, where you could start to edit the geometry instead of the object itself. In Blender, you may want to set up your project view differently for different projects. By default, in your layout tab, this is what you'll see when you open your project. But you also have other windows here. Typically the ones I would personally use are layout, sculpting, UV editing, texture painting, and shading. These different windows have setups pre-built for you for doing different tasks, but these windows are completely customizable in any mode, and you can even make your own presets here. To edit these viewport windows, the most simplest way is by dragging these up and down to get different size viewports and prioritize what you want to see. But say you want to get rid of your timeline editor, you get the plus sign in the bottom corner of the one that you want to keep, and you drag it down over the other editor. But say you then decide that you wanted that back, you drag from the corner up and you can bring it back. Now this doesn't have the timeline editor. If we want to get that back, we can come up here to this part where we can change our editor type, and in here we can see timeline here, which is what we started with. This works for every single one of these, so we can change these to anything that we need. A really important thing to understand in Blender is how your selection and active selection works. So in Blender, you're going to have your active selection, which is your primary selection. If you have one object selected, it is always going to be your active selection. But once you select multiple objects, you're going to see how there's two different tones of orange. The darker orange is part of your selection, but the lighter orange is your active selection. So this will be the object that when you change a setting, it's only the settings of this object that will be changed. A really important part of Blender is the 3D cursor and the origin point of an object. You can see here in the middle of the screen we have a red and white circle with a plus around it, and then there's an orange dot in the middle. The orange dot is the cursor of this object, while the red and white circle is the 3D cursor. Each object has its own origin point, as you can see when you click on a different object, and this moves with the object, and it works like an artificial centre of mass. This is really important for different reasons. So when you rotate an object, it rotates around the centre of mass. If you change this geometry in edit mode, it will not move the origin point, so when you rotate, it will rotate around this point and not the centre of mass. If you want to change this back to the centre of mass, but you can't get it lined up properly, we can go object, set origin, and we get multiple different options. If we just do geometry, or there is center of mass, they will do similar things. It's going to be slightly different, but if we do geometry, it's going to put it back to roughly in the center of that head. The 3D cursor can be used for things similar to this. You need to think of the 3D cursor as like a point in the space of your viewport that's being saved to be used for different reasons. If you shift right click, your cursor will move to the closest surface to where you click, or it will just move to a random point in space along where you click. this cursor has its own menu. So say I want to move the monkey's head to the space where this cube is. We can select the cube and press Shift S to open the cursor menu, and we get various different options here. What we can do is do cursor to selected to bring the cursor back to this object, and then we can select the object we want to move to that position and do selection to cursor, and now we have the monkey back in the middle of the world. But say your cursor's moved by accident and you now have nothing in the centre of the world, you also have this selection here called cursor to world origin, and it will bring it back to this point. Like, it will always come back to this point no matter how you move things, and then you can use that selection to cursor again. Say you have multiple objects and you want them all to move to one point, so we take all of these points, we want them in the monkey's head, so we select that last. Then we can go into our Shift S menu and we can do selection to active, and this brings all the objects to that centre point. Another really important part of Blender and softwares in general are hierarchies. Objects can be either a parent or a child to another object. Here, if I select this object and then this object to make this the active selection, I can do Control P to set parent to, and I can do object keep transform. Typically always use keep transform, as without keeping this transform it can cause issues later down the line due to things like scale and rotation being changed. So now that this is a parent of this object, you can still move this object around freely, but when you move this one, because it's a child, it will come along with it. And this doesn't need to stop at this layer. You can set this cube to be the child of this cube by doing the same process. So this one moves here, this one moves and takes the two of them along, and then if this one moves, it moves all three of them. Now you can also have multiple objects set to be children of one, so we can do this operation again, and it will overwrite the other parent, so be careful when you're parenting things because it will overwrite things you've set before. So now this no longer moves this, but when you move the large cube, all three of them move. In your scene collection you can see the hierarchy here. You can tell it's a parent because of the depth of the icon and name, so this is inset from these. And you can see here, if we parent this back to here, we now need to open this one up and it's indented again. Another generally useful thing to know in Blender is how to enable add-ons. To start, you go up to Edit, Preferences, and select the add-ons window here. We'll use BlenderKit as an add-on as it's very useful. Find your add-ons folder, whether it's in your downloads or you have a specific folder that you use. Select your add-on and then hit install. Once it's there, it will pop up here automatically, but if not, you can search and find it here and just enable. And that's all you need to do for most add-ons.